game-changing discussions on the big ideas that shape our thinking. This is One2One.
Hello and welcome to One2One. Ola Brown is founder and general partner of Healthcap Africa, a venture capital firm that focuses on early-stage investments in the health tech and fintech industries. She trained originally as a doctor and founded an emergency air ambulance service called Flying Doctors straight after medical school in 2007. In 2018, she co-founded a venture capital firm called Green Tree Investment and remains passionate about financing health tech startups across Africa. Ola Brown, welcome to One2One.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I'm really interested in your story. Obviously, you began professional life as a medic. You trained as a doctor, and you found your way into this wonderful world of venture capital.
Yep.
I'd like to hear your story. Who is Ola Brown?
That's a really interesting question, and I could answer it in a number of ways. But I think I'm somebody really passionate about development on the continent, particularly in the technology space. I'm a person that thinks about entrepreneurship and job creation as drivers of economic growth. And I think that, if we can solve the problem of economic growth on the continent, then we'll lift 1 billion people out of poverty. So that's sort of what keeps me up at night and keeps me working during the day.
I see. Okay, well, thank you for that. Interesting introduction to many of the things that we will talk about. So you founded Flying Doctors quite early in your journey. Mm-hmm. In July 2018, along with other partners, you founded an early-stage venture capital firm called Green Tree. Green Tree Investment Company, to provide capital to African tech startups. You still sit on the board of that organization. As we've already said, you trained originally as a doctor. You hold a bachelor's degree in medicine, master's in finance. You've published 5 books and counting. I'm interested in your early life. You made the decision quite early, of course, to go into the life of medicine, but somehow, at some stage, you pivoted the other direction. Can you start from quite early in the trajectory of your life and trace it through for me?
I don't know how early you want me to start, but I'll start at the beginning. I grew up in a town called Lowestoft. It's the most easterly point in England. I'm not sure many people have heard of it. And I grew up with my foster family there. And one of the things that I guess I felt growing up was that, I wasn't seeing many people that looked like me. And I think, I started thinking about Africa and Nigeria quite early in that trajectory. Fast forward to when I was in medical school, my younger sister, who was 12 years old at the time, came to Nigeria. And that time I was doing my clinical rotations in Yorkshire. And she got really ill. And there were some basic things that I thought, I don't know why I assumed this, I just thought would be in place that weren't. And as her situation deteriorated, for the first time I realized what a big gap there was between stuff that was so easily available on the NHS and what was unfolding in real time with my sister's care in Nigeria. And I started thinking, even if I moved now, like halfway through medical school, I could probably try to do something that could improve the healthcare system. If like 20, 30, 100, 500 Nigerian medics, nurses moved, then we could probably make a difference. And I wanted to be part of that. So I did finish my degree and started immediately plotting what I could do, a little section of the healthcare system that I could influence. And I thought one thing that I could do was, I was learning to fly during my house officer years. Right. So I thought, why not combine emergency medicine and acute medicine with aviation? And that's how I came up with the Flying Doctors idea to bring to West Africa. And so I moved almost straight after medical school and started a business. And it's quite weird to start a business at that age because people feel like you should have at least an MBA as a doctor, as a give injection doctor, because people now ask me like, what kind of doctor are you? Because they hear me speak about finance and they're like, oh, you know, what kind of doctor are you? I'm now almost finishing my PhD in finance. So I can actually say that I do have like a doctorate in something else.
A proper
Yeah,
doctorate.
a proper doctorate. But then they're like, oh, you know, what are you? A give injection doctor doing a business. It's like weird. But I think, you know, at the time that I did it, I didn't have so much to lose. I mean, it's a very different conversation asking a consultant or an attending with a family that relies on them to move to Nigeria and take like a massive career risk as well as a massive financial risk. But you know what house officers earn, so it wasn't so much of a financial risk. It still was a career risk, but it was, I felt like, a really good time to do it. So I ran that company for a few years. I got an opportunity to take some liquidity from the company. And it was at that stage that I realized that I'd never actually managed money before, not for myself and not for anybody else. So I thought about a few ideas of what I could do with it. But eventually I landed on private capital and private markets, and that's where I've been working ever since.
Okay, but I'd like to go back and to dip into something that you touched on. You mentioned a significant part of your life growing up, and you grew up in foster care.
Yep.
And of course, you've talked quite a lot already about the reason you made the decision to come back. But you also said you grew up not seeing many people like you. Yeah. How much of that decision to return do you believe was informed by that other side of things, growing up in England and not seeing very many people?
I think it was a big part of the decision. I mean, I can remember when I was made an angel in the nativity in my primary school, and parents complained because it was a bit odd to put a black person as an angel.
Yes.
And it was odd enough for them to like complain to the school. So, you know, it was like very interesting growing up in Lowestoft at that time when I was the first black person that most people had ever come into contact with in their lives. I mean, some people thought I just hadn't had a bath in a long time. Like, there were only 4 channels on English sort of main TV at the time, and there just were no black actors, maybe one in EastEnders or something. So people hadn't really seen something that looked like me before. So I used to like, you know, attract a lot of stares.
Lots of people coming up, touching your
hair, particularly the hair. So I thought like that was odd. But also as I sort of started university and started getting exposed to a lot of Nigerians and Nigeria, I started realizing that there were actually like quite a lot of successful business people in Nigeria. And even if you look at the statistics today, there are 23 black billionaires in the world. And if you take out sports and entertainment billionaires from the American numbers, then Nigeria has the same number of black billionaires as America, despite the fact that America's economy is like several times
more
bigger, exponentially bigger. And it just shows that Nigeria is actually quite unique in terms of the number of financially successful black people that it's able to produce, more unique than the UK. More unique than Germany, more unique than all of these larger economies. And I started seeing, like, through university, some of the success stories that were coming out and how, you know, I felt like drawn to it. I felt like, you know, I'm seeing these bankers and I'm seeing these people that own airlines and I'm seeing these people that own like large factories. And, you know, this might be something that I could do as an alternative. I still wanted to stay in healthcare because I thought, you know, I didn't really know much about anything else. But it was something that I was sort of deeply attracted to. So sometimes when people say, you know, what drew you to Nigeria, I tell them that I'm an economic migrant. Because that's how Nigerians who move to the UK and the US and Mexicans that move into America are described, in search of economic opportunity. And I think, you know, I came here with a passion, with a dream, but also in search of economic opportunity, the economic opportunity that I could see that was going on and the growth that I thought I could see.
Of course. So we've talked about regions, talked about our economy here, compared it a little bit with the US, the UK, and what Black people, what Africans are doing in different parts of the world, and your desire, your passionate desire to return for many of those reasons. So I want to use this to begin to delve into what is now your passion, finance, health tech, fintech. And I want to center that discussion around where we are, Africa, Nigeria. So Africa has too many small businesses. That's an Economist article from January this year. What does that mean, really? Here's your chance to dip into.
So I think it was almost 10 years ago now, McKinsey and Company published a paper called Lands on the Move. And one of the things that they analysed is the number of Fortune 500 companies that different regions of the world had produced. Brazil has Fortune 500 companies. India has Fortune 500 companies. Asia has Fortune 500 companies. Africa has not yet produced one of the biggest 500 companies in the world. When you even look at companies from that report at that time that make $500,000 and above, there were only about 25 in Nigeria. Half of all big companies in Africa were in South Africa. And what do big companies do? They employ people and they provide business for medium-sized and small companies that do B2B sales. So without big companies, you don't get the capitalization on the stock exchanges that you want, you don't get the employment that you want, you don't get the tax revenue that you want. Our companies need to go from startup to scale up. We have a huge number of micro businesses and small businesses, but a lot of them operate in the informal sector. So how do we get them to formalize? How do we get them employing more people? How do we get them to pay tax? How do we get them to scale and list? How do we get them big enough for private equity? These are sort of the questions, major questions for sort of finance people, people involved in financial engineering, people working in the finance sector to answer, because that's key to economic growth. What is economic growth? What is a big economy? It's an economy with big companies paying big taxes, employing lots of people.
Absolutely. So let's delve a little bit further into what that actually means. So what you're saying, really, what I think we are saying so far, is that one of the big differences between us and the more developed economies of the world is the way our businesses are structured. And the size of businesses that are here. Big businesses employ, of course, lots of people, create more infrastructure. So there are those who will say that in this country, in Nigeria, in the last decade or two, we've had a near revolution in the traditional banking industry. Perhaps there isn't that much to be said for aspirations towards investment banking. And we've talked also about the mechanics of our economy vis-a-vis other developed economies elsewhere. How important is it for us to have an economy that is driven by stock market activity? And what's the relationship, in your view, between that and the sort of innovation that needs to happen in the economy to move it forward? And where is the role for venture capitalist firms like yours in that mix?
I absolutely love that question. I think that's my favorite question of the interview so far, because there's such an interesting evidence-based relationship between innovation and stock market activity. So there are a lot of famous studies, both in corporate governance journals and in financial journals, that talk about bank-focused economies and talk about stock market-focused economies. And what the evidence shows us is that actually bank-centric economies, where most of the capital flows from banks, are overall less innovative than when most of the capital flows from stock markets and equity. And that's pretty obvious when you think about it. If you have any friends that are bankers, they're conservative, right? They wear suits every day. They're a bit stuffy.
Pinstriped.
Yes, they're very sort of slow to make decisions. They're very risk averse. So they're not likely to back innovation in the same way that stock market investors will. So part of the reason why America has become so successful is that 30% of households in America are invested in the US stock market. It's the biggest stock market in the world. This is what they call American exceptionalism, in that they have a unique capacity, both from the stock market side and from the venture capital side, to uniquely back innovation. If you go back to the 1970s and look at the levels of innovation in Europe and in Japan and America, they were roughly the same. And then came the venture capital industry, that ability to back highly innovative, highly scalable companies. And, America took off. And now there's absolutely no comparison between the level of innovation that you see in the United States compared to Europe and Japan that were their sort of former peers. So stock markets are essential. Stock market investors are essential. And the evidence has shown time and time again that stock markets are more likely to support innovation than more bank-centric economies. And also innovation is what separates us from animals. Our ability to innovate continually as human beings, as in agriculture, going from like basic tools to more mechanized farming, developing computers, developing vaccines. I mean, I say that the three biggest innovations of the past 100 years in healthcare are antibiotics, anesthesia, and vaccines. Imagine where we would be without those three things. We wouldn't be able to do any surgery without anesthesia. We'd have millions of children dying without vaccines. And, most of the people in this room would have died without antibiotics as children, because it would have been that chest infection or that little scratch on their hands that would have sort of killed them. So our ability to innovate is really important. And innovation has always driven us forward. But not only has it driven us forward, it's made countries rich, because your ability to get rich as a country is your ability to make things that the world wants. And some countries have done that in a small way, like Taiwan, for instance. They're focused on just semiconductors. That's what they know how to do. They make chips, and they make them very well, and they make them better than anybody else in the world, and they've gotten rich. Some people are able to innovate around their production process. So, for example, if you think about Qatar, Saudi, etc., they've been able to innovate around producing crude oil really cheaply at scale. And that was partly because they were naturally endowed with that, but yet they infused a level of efficiency that some countries, particularly in Africa, haven't been able to get to. When you think about America, it's innovation. When you think about France, it's luxury. But somehow all of these countries, when you think about Singapore, it's financial services. But when you think about all of these countries, somehow they've managed to find their niche in the world and make things that people want. And they've done it in an innovative way. And I think that that's something that, innovation is and continues to change the world. Over 50% of US stock market capitalization is venture capital backed companies, meaning that if the US hadn't backed innovation back in the 1970s and 80s, there'd be a much smaller stock market than there is today. The Magnificent Seven practically accounted for most of the growth on the stock exchange over the past 5 years. So innovation is really important, and I think innovation is our future. It's been our past, but it's also our future. And I think the richest countries in the world will be the people that can produce innovation, whether it's innovation in terms of process, innovation in terms of new technology, innovation in terms of new medicines. But innovation creates wealth and it drives the world forward. And I really think that Africa can be part of that story. And I'll tell you why. There's something that Peter Thiel says that is really interesting, that kind of conflicts with some of the things that I've just said, but I'll say it anyway because I think it's an interesting point. He says, actually, in 1970, we stopped innovating in the physical world completely. So, the era of antibiotics and vaccines and supersonic jets and all of the things that we're innovating in terms of energy and access to energy, that all stopped actually in 1970. And we started solving for boredom, not disease.
I see.
So when you think about what people would classify as the biggest innovations since 1970 or 80, you'd talk about Facebook and TikTok and Twitter and Amazon. But what do those companies really do? They help you access consumer goods faster. You can buy clothes faster. You can express yourself and vent in a limited number of characters.
Enable your lifestyle.
Yeah, you can enable your lifestyle.
You aspire towards.
But he says, what have we really done about dementia? What have we done about Alzheimer's? How much progress have we made on the big problems? Have our planes gotten faster? Have we cracked nuclear fission? Have we really innovated in the physical world beyond solving for boredom and solving for fast access to consumer goods? And I would say that this is where African innovators can really play. I think that in the emerging world, China, Brazil, Africa, India, our biggest problem isn't boredom. And a lot of the startups that we're seeing are actually innovating for the physical world. And I think that could be something that we could give to the world. And we're already seeing evidence of that in some of the startups that we're investing in, some of the startups that we're seeing in our pipeline. They're not innovating around boredom. No. There's not a single big company that was created to solve boredom in Africa right now in terms of our tech industry. And that's what makes our tech industry quite unique. And I think that if we continue on this trajectory, then this sort of hard innovation is something that we'll be able to offer to the world.
Absolutely. So there is a desperate need for Africa to innovate itself out of its problems. As you've said, we're not solving or innovating for boredom. There are crucial, desperate problems that we need to innovate ourselves out of. But of course, there are those, again, who, whilst we're having the discussion about innovation and accepting the need for Africa to innovate very quickly, there are those who would want very quickly to talk about the level of risk that comes with that. Now, of course, you run a venture capital firm, and your answer to innovation, or part of the way you assist this, is through technology. So you invest in tech startups. Of course, many of these startups are coming to you with nothing more than a PowerPoint presentation. I think it's fair to say. And you have to conceptualize that risk. You have to assess it and decide who to back. Okay, bearing in mind we're trying to solve big problems here. How do you make those decisions?
Absolutely.
Where you sit?
So I'd like to talk about the issue of risk first, because I think that one of the biggest problems is like an understanding of what risk really is. And I think, people say that venture capital is risky. I think the alternative to venture capital is extremely risky. Absolutely. Because if we don't innovate and we don't fund innovation, then we stay like this.
We'll stay where we are.
So when anybody says, venture capital is risky, I'm like, look outside.
Yeah. The world is leaving you behind.
Yeah, whether you're in Nigeria or Congo or Kenya, just look outside your window. Do you want to remain like this? And what got people that did not remain like this out of this? Yes. It was innovation. And venture capital is a tried and tested way of funding innovation. So I don't think the risk is in the asset class. I think the risk is in not embracing this asset class. But then the issue is, how do we now pick the winners? Yeah. And I think that that's a bit of a science and a bit of an art. First of all, you need a huge deal pipeline. So you need to be seeing, I would say, about 1,000 deals a year to be able to get the pool to choose from. And then you need to be continually speaking to founders. And there's a lot of pattern matching involved in terms of what actually makes a great founder. But in general, it needs to be somebody with a special skill, somebody with some sort of deep subject matter expertise, and somebody that has done it before. That's always a good indicator that they can do it again. It's also that they're tackling a big market. So there's sometimes people see a gap in the market, but there's not really a market in the gap. So a lot of the work that we do is around looking at the market and assessing the market. And that's why we concentrate on just two sectors, fintech and health tech, because we know those markets really well as a firm. And obviously being a doctor, master in finance, PhD in finance, focused on fintech, and I'm just completing that. That helped me to sort of have really deep academic expertise as well as experiential expertise as an investor to really understand those markets and help our team dimension those markets. So I'd say it's a founder and the market. It's a product as well. So we spend a lot of time on the product. If they've built an MPV, looking at what traction they've had with the product or the quality of the product. And in VC, we say that we look at the jockey, the horse, and the market. So we look at the jockey, the founder, the person riding the horse, because that matters in a horse race. And then you look at the horse, you look at the business, and then you look at the overall market. And you want to especially know whether there's a big enough market for the product, because if you're backing a rapidly scaling business, then it needs to be in a large market. Otherwise, you'll get what you call pseudo market fit, and the growth will stall. So you want to make sure that the market is big enough, and then you want to look at the founder or the founding team, what they've done before, what sorts of indications from their workplaces, for example, or their businesses that they've started, or their academic record shows grit and shows discipline, because people that have gotten great grades in school, people that have gone through transitions, people that have worked in early stage businesses, people that have, sold a lot in their jobs and have had to do a lot of selling, tend to be indicators of grit, but also what kind of expertise do they have, particularly in deep tech, biotech space. Sometimes they have ideas that are hidden from the rest of the world. Some PhD in some area of a tiny molecule that people don't really realize its potential. So we do a lot of research around their research and try and see what deep subject matter expertise they have, speak to our colleagues in pharmaceutical firms, and really see whether their ideas have legs and they're acquirable assets.
Sure. So, of course, part of what I'm hearing from you is that also from your point of view, what one really wants to do is back a subject matter expert in that area.
Yeah.
That is, of course, euphemism for back Ola Brown if you're looking into health tech and fintech. Okay. So I'm going to ask us to pivot a little bit to the other side and talk about what we know is a looming, again, that word again, risk. We've agreed that the alternative to innovating is to fossilize, of course. But of course, I'd like to bring up and remind us of a company like Okra. Join the long list of African tech startups that have folded. Of course, after raising millions of dollars internationally and attracting talent as well. You've already alluded to this, but what exactly was missed there? And what are the pitfalls, actually, that someone in your position and investors ought to be looking out for along this journey of aggressive innovation?
So I think the first thing to point out before anything is entrepreneurship can embarrass anybody.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's not fair. Entrepreneurship is not fair. I always joke with the Bible verse. I say that entrepreneurship is no respecter of persons. There's a Bible verse that says that God is no respecter of persons, and I think God and entrepreneurship have that same sort of approach where I've seen entrepreneurship embarrass people that you would never think based on their qualifications, their track record and their CVs. And somebody with a primary 5 education can wake up in Enugu and do that same business and be successful without any of those qualifications. And actually, one example that I give is a long-term capital, which was a massive algorithmic hedge fund started by a Nobel Prize winner in finance. And you would think that what is the best, deepest subject matter expert that you could ever find, right? It's somebody with a Nobel Prize in finance, that his Nobel Prize was won for the business that he was about to start. And that business failed so badly that it was one of the only hedge funds that actually had to be bailed out by the central bank in America because he made some pretty basic mistakes. So how do we avoid failure? In entrepreneurship, there's no way of avoiding failure. A lot of failure in entrepreneurship just comes from poor timing, It comes from poor strategy. It comes from maybe too early. So I always talk about the technology that was used to make blockchain. I think the person that designed that technology died thinking that his innovation was a failure and it was just too early. When you think about the early iterations of social networks, for example, they just didn't get that inflection point. And there's a really amazing book called Good to Great. And it talks about, it compares academically companies that were started at the same time, in the same market, with similar teams, with the same resources, and one went bankrupt and one did really well. And it compares these pairs of companies, and it does about 6 of these companies. And he does it again, the same author in Built to Last, a follow-up book, and tries to analyze like what actually separates people in exactly the same markets that do exactly the same, seem to be doing exactly the same thing. And one succeeds and one fails. And there's a huge number of factors that, it would be very, very difficult for anybody to predict. However, there are ways to manage the risk of entrepreneurship. And I think that that's really the focus. We can't really hyper-focus on the things that we can't control, but there are some things that we can control, and that's what we aim to do at Healthcap. So I think the first thing that companies suffer from sometimes is overfunding and empire building. So when I use the term empire building, I mean the first step to becoming a big company is becoming a successful small company. And I think that sometimes founders miss that step. So they raise lots of money, they hire lots of people, and they think they're hiring the right people because they hire people from big companies. But the job of an executive in a big company is very different from the job of an executive in a small company. So I can remember sitting at this American startup, and he was talking about his company that failed, and he hired somebody from Google, product developer, as his product manager, and he spent his entire seed round on one hire, because they tell you as an entrepreneur to hire the best people. So obviously Google is the best people. And they were supposed to be churning out lots of products, like almost on a daily basis within this startup. But what he didn't realize is this hire from Google had spent his entire 10-year career managing the outbox function of Gmail. So this was, and he was part of a 100-person team, and he was doing a very small part.
He didn't realize that.
I think the idea and the privilege of hearing somebody that wanted to leave Google to join his startup made him spend all the money that he had. So I think one of the things that people don't realize when they're interviewing is that talent and the best talent for an early stage company is very different from the kind of talent that you'd need at a scale up. And it's very different from the kind of talent that you'd need for a large company. So even if the CFO of a $19 billion company offers to work for free at your startup, it's going to be difficult for this person, and he might not be the right fit because there's probably like 200 people on his finance team. He doesn't do a lot of the things that he would have to do at a startup. The CFO in a startup might also have to function as a sales manager, might also have to do a bit of HR. So what you need is an army of generalists to begin the journey with you. That's 0 to 1. It's the most difficult thing. I think I kind of, people took it the wrong way when I said that if you make me CEO of NVIDIA, then I'll probably do okay. That's not an arrogant statement. That's to just say that a company that already has recurring revenue, that has customers, that is already big, like it's relatively easy to get there when it's done.
Correct. Yeah.
But that 0 to 1 stage, very, very difficult. Very few people can do it. And you need to be all in at that stage. When you get to 10 to 100, it gets a bit easier. When you get to 100 to 1,000, honestly, like you have the team to do it. It's like it gets a lot easier. And that's why when people ask me, like, especially in England, of course, they'll say, oh, if Nigerians are so smart, like, why don't they go and fix their country? Why can they only be so smart in England? And I'm like, it's easy to work in a system that is already functioning. But 0 to 1, you need a critical mass of highly talented people to do it. Whether it's in nation building or whether it's in entrepreneurship, it's the same kind of concept that applies, where, that's one problem. I can't go through all the problems because we don't have much time, but that's one problem that I thought, a lot of people don't realize intuitively.
So very unique and very particular skill set.
Absolutely.
You build from 0 to 12.
0 to 1.
Or 0 to 1. And but my question, of course, is that how does that big time CFO find himself up there if it's probably never been involved in a startup?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's okay. So I'd like to talk about a very interesting concept you raised earlier. You focus on the jockey, the horse, and the market.
Yeah.
How about the crowd, the spectators?
The customers.
Yeah, and those, customers or not, who create that atmosphere within which your company exists. I asked that question to ask this, talking about the sort of enabling environment that needs to exist. We've talked about different companies, different organizations, different countries, really. Do you feel that Nigeria or Africa in general, at this point in time, has a sort of environment that would encourage venture capital's appetite to thrive, or for innovation to thrive?
I find that such an interesting question. Not my favorite question, but a very interesting question, because I don't fully know the answer to this question. But what I do know is what I can observe in the world around me. Like I said, there are more Black billionaires here than there are in America. There are plenty of Nigerians in America. There are plenty of Nigerians in the UK. But even in this enabling environment, they've not built companies of scale. Even the Indians have built companies of scale, both in the US and the UK. But Nigerians really en masse haven't. I can't think of sort of 10 Nigerians off the back of my head, off the back of my, sort of just on the back of an envelope that have built companies of scale in Britain. And when I mean companies of scale, I mean $100 million of revenue and above. And I can't think about that in Nigeria, in America either. It's very difficult for me to name them. So are those enabling environments or not? But there's lots of Nigerians that have built companies of scale in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, that's the bit I'm interested in.
Does that make this an enabling environment or not? There's lots of immigrants, first generation and second generation, Indians, Lebanese, Chinese, that have built companies of scale in Nigeria. But Nigerians haven't built companies of scale in India or Lebanon or China. So what does that say about this environment? There's South African companies. I mean, one of the biggest companies in Nigeria is a South African company that has come into Nigeria and built a company of scale here. So when we use the term enabling environment, what do we really mean? Enabling for who? Enabling for what? And do I think that Africa is an enabling environment? I think Nigeria, like I said, is unique. We have the same number of Black billionaires, excluding sports and entertainment, that made their money from business as America. That's not the case in Congo. That's not the case in Ethiopia. That's not the case in Namibia. That's not the case in Zimbabwe. That's not the case in Malawi. That's not the case in Senegal. Nigeria is uniquely an economic powerhouse when it comes to producing companies of scale run by people that look like us. And it doesn't only work for Nigerians, it works for immigrants as well. And these other countries that I mentioned, they don't work as well for immigrants as Nigeria is. So I think it's a great place for foreigners to invest their money, because we do have a lot of successful foreigners that have started from first generation. And now Lebanese are running fourth, fifth generation businesses of over $100 million in revenue here in Nigeria without impediments. And I think it would be very difficult for a Nigerian to do that somewhere else. So I do think that Nigeria is unique in that way. But like I said, I haven't directly answered, is this an enabling environment or not? But I've just said
for venture capital input.
But in terms of for venture capital, I do think, again, Nigeria is the biggest startup ecosystem in Africa. When you want to measure size of exits and size of companies, a number of unicorns, in every single metric probably that you could have in terms of technology, Lagos is Africa's biggest ecosystem. When you look at efficiency of unicorn production, $1 in Nigeria or $1 in Africa is more efficient a dollar of venture capital in Africa is more efficient than I'm more likely to produce a unicorn than a dollar in Asia, a dollar in Europe, or a dollar in America. So again, when we talk about enabling environment, I'm really interested in what people think. I'm really interested in observing the discussions because I don't have the answers, but I do have some statistics to sort of talk about the business environment in general, and then what we've done specifically in the venture capital and technology space.
I think really that there are many factors at play here, and I love your example of the jockey, the horse, and the market. I think it's far more complex than that. Of course, the environment has its own place and role, but there are constant interactions, of course, between the players, the environment, and everything else that may exist. So we've talked quite a lot in this conversation. You've already distilled quite a lot of wisdom in a few minutes, but I'm interested really because I still find your journey quite interesting, quite a hugely interesting journey. Who or what have been your main inspirations along this path in this journey?
I would say my biggest inspiration of all, and if you follow me on social media, you already know this, is Aliko Dangote. He's been my biggest inspiration as an entrepreneur. I just wrote a long article about him on LinkedIn. And I felt like my article wasn't like, all praise, right? I also said he's had some downsides, he's had some failures. In fact, he's had more failures than he has successes. Didn't do very well in the noodles business, in the tomatoes business, in the juice business. If you count his failures, they're more than his successes. But I think he has a really resilient spirit. And I think the biggest sort of factor for any entrepreneur is that resilient spirit and being willing to try again and being willing to think through different ways and being willing to have the emotional sort of capacity to tolerate setbacks.
Of course, like grit.
Yeah. Which
really is the one thing more than anything else that a life and educational system aims to give you.
Yeah.
That
absolutely.
true grit to succeed. So if you were to distill all of the lessons you've learned from your own journey, Aliko Dangote and others, into a single sentence, what would that statement be, Ola Brown?
I think that I would say obsession. It would be one word. It wouldn't be a sentence. And I think that one of the things that I've now profiled 4 entrepreneurs in my articles. I've spoken about Herbert Wigwe, I've spoken about Atedo Peterside, I've spoken about Jumovia, and I've spoken about Aliko Dangote. So I've written articles on all of them, sort of pulled together from stuff on the internet, my personal interactions with them, and data points from Nigerian Stock Exchange. And I think that one thing that I've learned from those people is obsession with the craft, obsession with the lifestyle. And one of the things that I write in the Dangote article is it's possible to stay dedicated to the mission and grieve what it took from you. So that means making trade-offs every day. And, I've made trade-offs. I'm sure they've made much bigger trade-offs. I think it's obsession. Discipline isn't enough. I really think that you need to be obsessed with the craft of entrepreneurship and building businesses.
Obsession beyond the point of discipline.
Yeah.
So we are in a particular period in our country this time. We're speaking here in the week that follows the passing of a former president, a former head of state, President Muhammadu Buhari. And plenty of talk, plenty of reflections now on what his legacy will be and what he has bequeathed to this country going forward. And I say that to make the statement that the question, of course, of legacy is really, really important for our existence. You've just talked about obsession beyond the point of discipline. It means really that you do care, you must care about how you will be or want to be remembered. What would you, Ola Brown, like your legacy to be? I asked that of you at a tender age of, do I dare declare it, 39. It seems a totally premature question to ask, but I'll ask it all the same. What would you like your legacy to be, and how close would you say that you are, quite odd, to achieving that?
That's a big question.
It is, deliberately so.
And it depends on sort of the stage of life that you are, what you want your legacy to be. And I think it depends on the kind of decisions that you make, and not everybody has the same perspective on this at all. I mean, some people want it to be their business achievement, some people want it to be their family, some people want it to be their inventions, some people want it to be academic research. But for me, thinking on the question of legacy and what I would like to be remembered for, I think it's a combination of all four of them, really. Being a super dedicated wife to my husband, but being super dedicated to my business as well. And making that little, I mean, Steve Jobs says, aim to make a dent in the universe. So making that little dent in the universe. I'm not sure that I'm going to really, hardly anybody, well, in 100 years' time, hardly anybody will be remembered for anything. But in terms of legacy, just making a tiny, tiny dent while I was here.
And back again to the metaphor of the horse, the jockey, the market. And I add to that the crowd, those who are there cheering you on. You spoke very briefly about how important it is for you to be a super dedicated wife to your husband. How important has family been to you in this journey of grit, obsession, and discipline so far, Ola Brown?
So I am a big marriage advocate. I'm always I really think that if you're not married, you need community. So some people say, marriage doesn't matter to me. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not talking about marriage in the specific sort of partnership of husband and wife. You can have, a community of women. You can have a community of other men. You can have a community that involves your parents. But I think community in general is important. Relationships are important. And having people that have your back is important. And definitely for me, having community and having, an amazing husband has been, absolutely a big part of my journey. And, I mention it as probably in any interview, that he's like a massive part of my life. And, I wouldn't be able to, he gives me a lot of energy and inspiration on a day-to-day basis to keep on doing what I'm doing. So sharing your life and growing old with the right group of people, I think it's really important.
And finally, Ola, if you were to be stranded on a desert island, if I could gift you one thing, perhaps a book or whatever, what would it be? What would you ask of me at this point?
I'm not really a gift person, to be honest.
A book, then?
A book? I think I've read most of the books that I want to read. I'll have to think about that when I get back to you. So that's an IOU from me to you to try and think about what I would actually wrong, because I can't think about it on the spot.
Ola Brown, from Lowestoft to Lagos.
That could be the title of my next book.
Absolutely. I've just gifted you that one. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
One-to-One.
Thank you.